We spoke earlier, and I told you I haven't seen too many issues as hot as education and its funding the way it is now. It's just unbelievable. And schools across the state are in a financial freefall. There's no way to sugarcoat that. Districts are closing school buildings. They are laying off personnel. They're eliminating programs, and they're selling properties just to survive a single budget year. Then they wake up and they're in the same boat the following year. We've had, I think, 10 districts come before us, and it's diverse. It's all over the state. It's not limited to any one region or any one, demographic even, as far, or, constituency like that. So, we're hearing from all over the state. Student achievement has not recovered to the 2019 levels. Chronic absenteeism is still 50% above where it was before the pandemic. So there are certain measures that we look for improvement that don't seem to be improving. These aren't accidents. It's a direct consequence of what previous administration has done, and it seems like the governor is continuing some of those policies. Now, do you have anything that you can point to that's different that would, kind of steer the ship in a different direction and get some results that we're looking for?
So I certainly would mention, this year, while we didn't have time to look at redoing the funding formula in its entirety, I think that absolutely has to happen. And what you just shared about the diverse districts who are facing challenges, I think is a really important point, and one that speaks to this need to look at the formula overall. We know that there are many diverse districts across New Jersey with different circumstances, and their ability to provide an excellent opportunity for their students has a variety of different root cause issues that we need to be looking at carefully as part of that. This year's budget, we had a short timeline to look at what do we know that would not introduce too much volatility into the system, and we were able to look at the stakeholder feedback and some of the other modeling from these adjustments from prior year. But I absolutely think that we should look at them as a group, and I look forward to working with the legislature to do so, to make sure that we're not moving forward with tweaks, but really looking at substantively how can we both make sure that this system and formula works better, and then of course how do we drive down real costs that are also straining the system.
We've had a few years now outside of COVID, which was, nightmarish in many respects. But we have to start seeing some results at some point. You can give a few years, maybe cushion to, allow for that. But, at this point, we're spending, as you pointed out, more money than ever, I guess, on education as a whole. But let me talk about what the budget does actually to taxpayers on the ground, because that's really who's, being impacted, whether they have children in the school system or not, or they're just property taxpayers. New Jersey already has the highest average property taxes in the nation, roughly $10,600 a year. First time, I think, in ever that we've been over $10,000. And now the Sherrill administration is cutting aid to 167 districts. And as you pointed out, I don't doubt that we're spending more money on education overall. It's just the apportionment of where it's going, where there are some districts that are fairly well off, and other districts, as I pointed out, the 167 districts. And the capping of increases at 6%. For 211 districts that are owed more, very problematic. And hiding behind the veil of a record investment. And we have to be careful not to lose sight of the districts that are really getting hurt, even though there is more overall funding going out, to the state. The message to those districts is your property taxes are not high enough. And I've heard it too, where there's some sort of indifference. Well, they're wealthy districts, they can afford it. That's not the way, we should be apportioning school funding. We can't do that because not every district is affluent. There are districts that are very, very, working class that have an affluent section to it. And, we see some of the school districts that are really getting hurt. Middletown, Union Beach, very working class area. You have Cherry Hill, you have Jackson, Jefferson up north. All of these districts, you can't say that they're affluent, and because their property values went up, we don't have to worry about them. They'll be able to deal with this. So what can you tell those districts who are getting hit with 27% increases in their insurance costs, things that are out of their control? how do they deal with that without raising taxes? I have people call my office sobbing that they can't afford to pay anymore. And we're at a critical stage here where we just can't keep going back to that same well of the taxpayers to bail out these enormous jumps and gaps in budgets every year that they find themselves in. So I guess my question is, what would be your answer to those districts, the 167 that saw cuts, the 211 that are capped? How do they survive this without raising taxes?
I think it's really important first that I want to make sure I'm not expressing any indifference. I think these are very, very difficult conversations. And as I mentioned, the goal needs to be that all of our school systems are providing excellent opportunity for students, and we need to make sure that they're able to do that. As you mentioned, and in the group of districts you listed, there are a variety of different reasons for this. And I certainly would not want the message to any community to be that about continuing to raise taxes. But I think at the same time, when we look at the system, we are seeing this happening on a very large scale. It's not only those districts that this system isn't working for. And so I would continue to emphasize that I think for individual districts, the individual context about their student enrollment, about what this means, about what shared services they may or may not have access to, those are important conversations, and they're conversations that we know that school leaders and school boards and communities are having every day to try to make this work. And we also know, again, that there are ones we're not hearing about who are doing those same things to make sure they're still providing opportunity. And this is why I would recommend that we really look at the entire formula and those calculations so that we can make sure that it's a system that works for all of our districts.
And I'm glad you mentioned that, the enrollment, and I think one of the things that triggers a cut in aid is dropping enrollment, but that doesn't apply everywhere. We've had districts that have
absolutely
enrollment drop that actually got quite a healthy bump in aid. So that doesn't seem to be applied evenly either.
I would mention that it is a formula, and this is where I think our ability to increase the transparency in the formula so you can see what is that driving factor. But as you mentioned, there's some nuance. There's additional aid categories that we haven't spoken about that are a part of this, and so with each individual budget, I think making sure they understand, is it enrollment, is it local fair share, is it something else that's driving that is important, because it is not the same across the board, but it is all being run with the same formula.
Okay, and my last question here. Newark will receive $1.386 billion in state aid this year, more than $500 million more than 8 years ago, before you were here. So, let me just point that out. Fewer than 1 in 4 Newark students are proficient in math. Again, results that we're not seeing what we would like to see. Fewer than roughly 1 in 3 can read at grade level. Again, not acceptable with that level of funding. Camden and Trenton tell the same story. At what point does this administration acknowledge that that money, directed the same way without accountability for outcomes, is not producing results? Now let me just clarify this. We want every district to have adequate funding. We don't want to just show up and throw money without commensurate results. So I just want to make that clear that we're not picking on any 1 or 2 school districts, but it's not producing results. How do we rectify that?
I think your point. I think there are districts across the state, and again, I know this data is not particularly easy to navigate at the moment, where we are not seeing the academic growth and achievement that we want to see. And we know that students in those districts don't have some of the same opportunity. But we need to have that conversation, I think, again, in its entirety with this connection to the funding formula. And I think knowing right now that we absolutely do not fund outcomes, we fund student need. And I think that that's an important and essential part of the New Jersey formula. But I think as we all look at it together, understanding how can we fund need but also make sure that our dollars are getting outcomes is an important and right question. And I think this is where some of Governor Sherrill's other priorities, including our emphasis on literacy and high impact tutoring, can help us take even some of those same existing dollars and make sure that we're supporting instructional practices across the state. So I think it's a both and in terms of looking at the funding formula and then also looking at, are there other ways that we can provide supports or guidance in terms of supporting local decision making on spending that provide better ROI.
Okay, and one other thing too, and then I'm done. I just want to point out at Newark, and it's been fairly well publicized, some of the expenditures are head scratchers, quite frankly. You have $2.9 million spent for catering for back to school night, things like that. $4.5 million for a museum for the district. These are things that when people read them in districts that are struggling, how do they resolve that, where they're struggling to keep programs and teachers and all of that, and then you see this kind of expenditure. So my point is that we need way better accountability. We really have to go through a fine-tooth comb and make sure everything is being legitimate expenditures, and any, non-essential expenditures, be reapportioned to districts that are struggling. I know the formula the way it is now, but I think there are things we can do right now under this old formula that would help a lot and make it a lot fairer and make it more effective too, where we get the outcomes or improvements in the outcomes that we're looking for, even with this record expenditures.
I think the point you make too about additional financial oversight and compliance statewide is really important, and this is one of the investments in the budget. I mentioned there's 2 new FTEs at the Department of Education, and it really is for this. What you mentioned in terms of being able to understand how districts are spending money, and then again, what does that actually yield? This is something that we need to be able to do more effectively, and we need better analytical tools, and we need staff to support it. I know this was not what you asked in the question, but when we see districts with mid-year deficits or other things like that, there are often warning signs in their audits and in other reports that we need to address earlier, and creating this function and continuing to bolster its efficacy at the Department of Ed will help us address that.
Right. Some of the expenditures that I mentioned were picked up in the audit.
No, so I just want to, so NORC has been a very hot topic the last couple of months, and that's fine. I'm very proud to be born and raised and still live there and raise my family there. But I think that, number one, thank you, Commissioner, for clarifying something, that the formula also is based on needs, not necessarily outcomes. Some of the kids in Newark face several issues before even getting to school. And at school, it is a part of their safe haven, and some of their issues get addressed. Years ago, before I was even in the legislature, I was part of the school board, and we received 5.5% in cut. We had nothing. Just so that you know, over the course of the last couple of years, Newark has closed over 40 schools, sold 12 school buildings, reduced staffing by over 1,200 positions, 953 teachers, 250 plus administrators. So when we all talk about some of the things that some of the districts are faced with now, the reason why Newark is at a certain point is because we did all of this. We were forced to do this with Patterson, Trenton, some of our most marginalized communities that didn't have anywhere to go, that couldn't increase taxes at the time, that were literally picking between a guidance counselor or a crisis counselor, which people don't even know what a crisis counselor does. When your guidance counselor has over 400 kids to guide to their pathway, to see that Newark within the last couple of years has had improvement on state assessments, language arts, math, even as standards have increased. When we're sending our kids to Ivy League high schools, maybe it's not the outcomes that some of the other districts have, but the improvements that Newark has made with the tough challenges that they've had, with no after-school programs, no sports, nothing, for years and years and years. I think we all need to take a step back, and instead of pinning districts against each other, which consistently, even before, when I was on the school board and it was state controlled, we had auditors there. We do, and Newark Public Schools doesn't audit outside of their regular audit and budgets that they submit to the state. They've had a federal audit for COVID funds, even though people think it is appropriate to still send letters to the federal government to do audit. I mean, let's stop. There is obviously a problem, right? We all know that. But what I hate is if we're finally receiving a portion of years of us being detrimented, years, and having school growth, of having more kids attending Newark Public Schools than ever before, I just feel really bad, because it's not the appropriate way to go. We shouldn't have to put Newark, Trenton, against any suburban or rural, it doesn't matter. We obviously need to fix an issue, but to consistently bring one municipality up all the time, forget there's over 38,000 kids. 38,000. If you include the charter school kids, it's over 40,000 kids that one municipality has to carry for. So when you look at the numbers, yes, they look big for some of the items, but you look at how many schools we have from preschool to elementary, and by the way, we are an Abbott district, so we have to offer preschool. So that is all that's encountered in there. I mean, I'm just tired of it. I love it. Keep talking about Newark, but let's not put Newark in a situation where we're shaming it. Let's put Newark in a situation where we're talking about what they have overcome, where we were at, and what we have to do now. The oldest school buildings in the nation that we have. 30 plus kids in some of the classes. I mean, the story goes on and on. So I love it. Talk about Newark, but can we focus on if there's inadequacies in the funding formula that need to be addressed? That's one issue. So focus on Newark and what they're finally getting because they haven't gotten for so long. It's enough already. Assemblyman.
Okay, and I'm pretty well done. I just want to clarify, and I really appreciate what my friend and colleague just said. The problem is they are the highest, the greatest funding in the entire state. So they're going to be questioned. That's just the way it is. The top 10 school districts get $4.4 billion. That's 7% of the entire budget. That's a lot. So we really have to look at this, not because we're picking on anybody, or any school district, I should say, but it's a natural thing where you look to see where the greatest number of funding dollars are going when others are struggling. So it's just a comparative.
But it is though, because it doesn't matter that you have top performing districts. You have a needs assessment. You have a needs base. So it's completely different. What we're talking about are apples and oranges. They're not the same, Assemblyman. They're not. Yes, if you're you could be a high performing district and yes, and still be cut. You could be a low performing district as we were, barely scraping the bottom of the barrel, and we were cut. So it's not an apples to apples comparison when you're talking about two different school districts, whether it's needs-based or whether it's outcome-based.
Exactly. But the point is, when we're in a crisis like this, we have to look at everything. And naturally, they're going to be the ones that are the most obvious because they're so heavily funded. We just want to make sure everything is being spent wisely. We're getting the outcomes that the investment is calling for.
But
so,
your outcomes might be different for your district than they are for mine. My outcome might be that my kids' reading and math levels went up, 4 or 5 points. That's huge. I'm not even sure if I'm saying that correctly. But it is different because it is about where you were to where you're at, where you need to get to. It's not necessarily about if you're performing this, you should get that. That is not the way that the formula has ever worked.
Right, but sometimes the funding is not the issue with performance and outcomes. Maybe there's other issues.
So we should only reward districts that are doing well, that are high performers, but we have districts that need help from day one as a child steps into the school.
Right, but does that help come in the form of more funding or additional funding? Or are there other factors that maybe are keeping these kids back from performing or improving?
So higher special ed, so it's 24% bilingual, 17% special ed district-wide. That's what I'm talking about. It is different because of what the districts entail, right? So if you have a lower number of bilingual students, your teacher population is going to look different, right, and a different pay scale than if you have a higher bilingual student base compared to the teacher. The same thing with special ed. At a 17% special ed district, our cost is going to be different than a cost of maybe another district that only has 2% special ed.
Right, but there are other districts that have similar percentages of special ed around the state.
With 60, what other districts have 24% bilingual and 17% special ed?
I didn't say the bilingual part,
Okay,
but
so
they have
that's-
higher percentages of special ed.
But it's all culminating, it's not just based on one.
Okay,
And Assemblyman,
that's all I have. Thank you.
Right. I'll just briefly offer too, and again, our ability to offer more data and to make sure that that's clear. As you mentioned with those larger districts, that because it's following student and student need, larger districts, of course, are getting quite a bit more. And just, again, knowing we have over 200 districts with less than 500 students as well. So obviously, there's a lot of districts that have data on that interplay between finance and academics.
Got it. Thank you.